Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Petra Anderson, and I'm really delighted to be with you today to share about a topic that is really close to God's heart, social justice. But before I go on, I would like to thank you, Josh. I don't know where you are, but he's already in Sunday school. I would like to thank Josh because he introduced this sermon so well with his stories from the ministry at Bulembo. Our church's relationship with Bulembo is a good example of engagement of a church community with social justice. And actually, when I chose this topic, I had no idea that Josh would be here. And I can certainly see God's hand in this. He puts these things together. And we need to look for that, how he does that, and when he does that. So the emphasis in our time together will be on exploring what it looks like for each one of us to engage in social justice. To engage in social justice faithfully as we live in exile. In other words, we want to ask ourselves, what does it look like to live as people who are in this world, but not of this world? We want to explore what it looks like for each one of us to contribute to social justice with Jesus at the center, and how that approach leads to a different approach from the world around us. With Jesus at the center, our approach revolves about our heart, attitude, and motivations before God. Instead of asking, how much good are we doing? Or even, are we doing the right thing? We need to ask first whether we are connected to God, to Jesus. We need to seek to feel what he is feeling, to do what he is doing. Our engagement with social justice has to originate in God's heart for the poor and marginalized. Thus, engaging in social justice is not so much about doing things for God as doing things with God. It means partnering with him as he is present to the poor and marginalized. In Exodus 34, we read that God describes himself as full of compassion and grace, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Therefore, it is not surprising that again and again, throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament through Jesus, God speaks about taking care of the poor and marginalized. He is encouraging his people to participate in this care with him as a reflection of their faithfulness to their compassionate God. He is encouraging his people to love and show compassion to what he loves and has compassion on. He wants our faith expressed in action, not just words or rituals. And so we read in Isaiah 58, "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share, to share our food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard." Then in the New Testament, we read how Jesus fulfills that longing of the Father when he says at the beginning of his ministry, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So we know that we are operating close to God's heart, to Jesus' heart, when we engage in social justice. But how is our engagement with social justice issues and dealing with the many injustices around us different from those around us who also engage in social justice but are not followers of Jesus? How are we to engage in social justice as exiles when we ourselves, we have to admit, often take living in privilege for granted and don't pay attention or are oblivious to the cost that might be to others? First, let's refresh our understanding of what social justice is, and let's look at some descriptions that everyone who has a heart for social justice, follower of Jesus or not, would agree on. Common ground, so to speak. Social justice has to do with recognizing and protecting human rights to food, shelter, and clothing. Furthermore, social justice is defined by the equitable distribution of resources, opportunities, and privileges within a society by ensuring everyone has equal access to things like healthcare, education, and economic mobility. Social justice grants dignity by respecting the inherent worth of every human being, regardless of background. And more recently, social justice acknowledges the importance of diversity. And in a country like Canada, many people will go, yes, that's what we want. That's what our laws are for. That's what we as churches want to promote. And yet, how do we reconcile this desire with the fact that there still is so much injustice, even here in Canada, in BC, in Vancouver, and even in churches, when it comes to how refugees are welcomed, or Indigenous issues are engaged, or LGBTQ people are treated? Then we look at social justice globally. We see even more injustice in countries with governments less concerned than ours about the poor and marginalized, and even more occupied than us with power and privilege for some, which comes at the expense of the poor. So first, we want to acknowledge that engaging social justice can be overwhelming. A couple of weeks ago, Sam talked about that. He pointed out that we are surrounded by polycrises, layers and layers of injustice that lead to incredible human suffering. And then Mark talked last week about sharing our faith with humility, gentleness, and respect, and about being prepared to give a reason for the hope we have in the midst of a broken world and our own brokenness. How can we assume that same posture of humility, gentleness, and respect, and have hope for healing, reconciliation, restoration, and alleviation of poverty and suffering, while injustices are piling up around us, and then we realize that we are contributing to social injustice by default sometimes, as we are utilizing organizations that misuse human labor, violate human dignity, so that we can have a certain standard of living, wearing clothes that are made with child labor, purchasing coffee that's cheap because farmers did not get paid sufficiently, or keeping at a distance to people who are different from us or don't fit our religious convictions. How can we uphold hope for healing when we realize that we need to take responsibility for healing of injustices from our collective history? And notice in that our own helplessness, or even resistance sometimes, to a complex social issue like residential schools or human trafficking that we would like to believe only happens elsewhere. So engaging in social justice can overwhelm and paralyze us. We might just want to put our head in the sand. Or social justice issues can wear us out, burn us out. We want to help so much, but we realize we are losing strength as we're doing it. Or social justice issues can make us seek for quick solutions without getting too deep into it, feeling too much pain. Or, and we see this sometimes on the news very well, it can put us into angry fight mode. And lo and behold, violence begets violence. So as we are living as exiles in this world, we can, and often unfortunately do, respond in all these ways in red, just like everyone else. Or, as faithful exiles, we engage in social justice with Jesus at the center. And that can make all the difference. We look where He is at work. We listen to where He invites us to participate, to operate in His presence, in His strength. We show compassion that originates in Him and starts with knowing that we are loved, and then we can see His love for others. We major not at what we can do, but we major on what He is doing. So our posture as those living in exile is participating with humility, gentleness, and respect in what God is doing in this world to bring about social justice. By being with, by being present, we are catching glimpses of God's kingdom in the here and now, in the midst of a broken world. We need to see that our desire to help originates in God's desire for the world, and that our resources are His gift to us to be used for the greater good. So for faithful exiles, it is not about our wanting to do good or our wanting to make the world a better place even. Many people want that. Or for faithful exiles, it's not about our wanting to take on a challenge or adventure and see whether we can overcome. Many empathetic people try to do that. And it is not even just about sharing our resources, because are they really ours anyways? So what that could look like, of course, it could look like partnering with a Christian organization that is also looking to God for guidance, like Bezulu, Inner Hope, or UGM in downtown Vancouver. Or it could be participating like a friend of mine as a social worker in an organization that believes we can only reduce harm, and as a follower of Jesus, shares her hope that in Christ, healing is at least possible. So when our own Jan Kwai invited me to be part of the Bezulu women's team to visit Bulembu in Eswatini in March of this year, my heart was drawn right away, but I felt God saying to wait until everyone who had never been to Bulembu before had signed up, because I actually had visited Bulembu in 2018 together with Mark. And lo and behold, all 12 spots were taken quickly. And I felt at peace about it. And then God put it on Jan's and the Bulembu staff's heart to open up a 13th spot. Dirty dozen, as someone said yesterday. And it became clear to me that I was to go. God will open the door when He wants to. And if we look for it, we will see it and hopefully willingly walk through. And I want to say it would be easy to just look at a trip like that as an adventure, exposure to a different culture, or even more holistically thinking maybe an opportunity to contribute to a worthwhile ministry. Or we could also look at this journey as a great sacrifice. A great sacrifice that we are willing to make and we think we should be making as Christians. Because we are sacrificing financially when we go on a trip like that, or even physically, as there are health concerns, going to a different country like Africa, or continent, or a different country like Eswatini. However, at the center of what God was asking of me, and I believe of all of us as we engage in social justice, was presence, to be with, and through that reflect His presence with us to others and enter into His presence with them. It was an invitation to holy ground, God being present and us being present to Him, and Him being present to where we were going. So in the end, for me, it meant sitting with staff one-on-one and offering spiritual direction, facilitating a time of reflection for the aunties, for the women's ministry and other staff, playing with the kids. For others on our team, it meant praying with, hiking with, painting with, playing with, cooking with, offering medical help together with the medical staff there. And out of that, being present, we gathered some ideas how our resources might be helpful. Because we have to know helping can actually hurt when it is not preceded by presence, by asking questions. And even asking questions of the poor. You see, it was not so much about doing things for, as much as being with, sharing, observing, learning, and through that offering our gifts and allowing our hearts to be transformed closer to God's heart. It was about recognizing new things that God wants to do in Bulembu, and actually in Eswatini as a whole, and participate in them through that, and through that reflecting God's presence and compassion with people there. So one part is what Josh was mentioning, that yes, the orphanage feels like family to a lot of these kids, but as they're seeking God, it becomes clear what the kids really need is a family of origin in one way or another, and so reintegrating them into their families. And that's a huge process, that's a huge undertaking. So to be open to have a different view of what God might mean by family. And it's not just running one of the best orphanages in the world. Yeah. The same year, 10th Church invited me to accompany a couple of groups to go to Rancho El Camino in La Paz, Mexico, one in March and one in October, and to engage with the ministry there. It is, interesting enough, also a ministry to children and families, and in their case, to children and families in the surrounding what's called colonias, poor neighborhoods without running water, people living in houses where land titles are up in the air and could be taken any time. Kids are dropping out of school due to lack of resources, and youth and young adults getting involved in gangs. My last trip was my third time at the ranch, and I distinctly remember when the eyes of one of the Mexican staff who lives in the colonias lit up when she saw me on our first night there, and this is what it looked like. We were on our first night there joining everyone at their church service on a gravel pit in the midst of one of the neighborhoods. And what happened was, she called out my name, Petra. And I responded, Gabby. And in good Latin American fashion, we hugged. Presence speaks. It says, I care. I'm with you. I know you. I know your name. In this next picture, some of the team of our March trip are gathering around Javier, fourth from the left, a local from the surrounding neighborhoods. We took this picture after we had been talking about how we could encourage him in the work he does with the equine therapy program that he built up from scratch at the ranch and that serves many kids from the colonias. Being with him, we recognized that God has given him amazing ability to work with the horses as well as a big heart for the kids of the neighborhoods. He only knows too well from his own upbringing. So then myself and another lady on our team felt a bit humbled when he asked us whether we wanted to experience equine therapy. It did not feel like serving or doing something to help. But he invited us each up on one of his horses and delighted in our participation. And presence here said, we trust you, Javier. You are doing great work. We want to know more about it. We want to experience it. And out of that, we can then inquire of him what the needs of this program might be. Presence was expressed in partnering with those living in poverty, as God partners with them, blesses them with his presence in the midst of difficulty and pain. Because some of you might say, well, I could never go on a trip like this. Good news. God might provide an opportunity for you to be present with the poor and marginalized right here in Vancouver. It's not that we need to be present everywhere. God asks us to be present somewhere. And so you could be connecting with an organization in the downtown east side, or just with a friend or neighbor who is struggling with mental or physical health, or participating with refugee or ESL ministry right here at the church. That's what it looked like for me for years before I went on my first missions trip, only 7 years ago. Now, why am I talking so much about presence? It is because compassion and justice are closely connected. Compassion is the inner feeling of care, and it literally means come with passion, pain. It's our willingness to be present with others in their pain before we can truly engage in justice work. We need to connect with people's pain and needs before we help. Of course, we cannot let care for people end at feelings, but need to be open to God's call to put this care into action. In a devotion by the Henry Nouwen Society, only yesterday, this was expressed in this way. A new world grows out of compassion, the willingness to be with pain. Now, there are 4 central things that we are invited by God to recognize when it comes to engaging with social justice as exiles. Yes, thank you. Embracing that we are broken and others are broken. Allowing God's comfort for us to overflow to others. Seeing Jesus among the poor. Looking for glimpses of God's kingdom now. I want to unpack this a little bit. Firstly, leaning into social justice as exiles means to embrace the reality that we are broken and look at others' brokenness out of that reality. This prevents any sense of superiority or judgment. Secondly, we need to allow God to fill us with His comfort, His love, His healing for us before our comfort and love can flow out to others. Otherwise, we go into the red, if you remember that, and we very quickly run on empty. We have to have experienced God's presence with us in our difficult times and struggles before we can be present, truly and empathetically present to others in their struggles. Only the confidence that He brought us through difficulty gives us the confidence that He is a way for the poor and marginalized as well. And He wants us to follow that path, not find our own. We have to recognize that what we have to give originates with God, not us. We love because He loved us first. Or, as 2 Corinthians, one of the passages we read earlier, puts it, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. It all starts with Him. Thirdly, we lean into social justice because we know that's where Jesus is, as Jesus Himself puts it in Matthew 25, and I want to read this again, because it's so important for us to recognize Jesus among the poor. Jesus says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And then the righteous will answer Him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Jesus showed us how to fulfill the longing of His compassionate Father to bring relief to the poor and marginalized. He has invited us to do as He did when He walked the earth. He even prophesied that we would do greater things, but certainly not in our own strength, but like Him, only by doing what He sees the Father doing. As we operate as God's beloved, we can then look outside and see God's image in those we encounter. And then we can know that when we are with the poor and marginalized, we are with Jesus. Finally, as we are leaning into the injustices in this world, we actually will be able to get glimpses of God's kingdom moving forward and bringing kingdom shalom into a dark world. We can experience what Jesus is praying for in the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Engaging in social justice as exiles starts and ends with relationships of trust. Us trusting God's love for us, as well as then trusting in His love for the poor and marginalized. Us engaging with the poor and marginalized through building trust by being present, listening deeply, ready to learn. We are not coming as experts with our great ideas and solutions. Then we are moving in alignment with the kingdom of heaven as it pushes into the darkness of the world to bring light. What Mark was suggesting last week when offering his approach to sharing his faith is also true when it comes to putting our faith into action as we engage in social justice. The kingdom of heaven moves forward at the speed of relationships of trust. And that's true whether we share our faith with words or in actions. And I said this before, but saying it again, we are not called to everything, but we are called by God to put our faith into action in some things, according to our God-given gifts and life circumstances. He will give us opportunities to align with His heart for the poor, invite us to partner with Him in His work with the poor. We will have to look and then be willing to go. Participating in what God is doing for justice in this world won't be comfortable, because encountering poverty and marginalization is never comfortable. It invites us to hold in tension deep sadness, like God's sadness, around the injustice and the suffering in this world. And it invites us to share in the pain. And then at the same time, we are invited to share in the deep joy around God's presence and His kingdom shalom emerging in the midst of a hurting world. The invitation here is to be with, not just read about, or especially not just hear about it in the news. The news is tilted towards the dark and generally does not take the movement of the kingdom of heaven that brings light into darkness into consideration. That's why it's so overwhelming. So move with God. Participating with Jesus in social justice will just ask for our willingness to be led by the Spirit and let go of control. We are asked to be open to put others' needs first. But mostly we are asked to see Jesus with them, to enter into God's compassion for the injustices in this world. And so as we finish off, here are some questions for you to reflect on for a couple of minutes. And as you're reflecting, don't think too much about solutions and ideas. Rather, be open to receive Jesus' invitation to be among the poor and marginalized with Him, as He shows the same compassion and love for the poor and marginalized that He extends to you. So here are the questions. Where are you in your life, in your circumstances, experiencing God's compassion for the poor and marginalized? Where in your life do you recognize Jesus among the poor? And in what ways might He be calling you to be present there? I'll just give you a minute to just even think about one of these questions and bring them before Jesus, bring them before God, and ask Him to show you. And then in what ways might He be calling you to be present with Him there? Jesus, we are thankful that You are at the center of everything in this world. And that as You want us to know that we are Your beloved, that we then can go into this world to see that belovedness in others, and especially in the poor and marginalized. I pray that we would see You, that we would realize that we are with You when we are present to the poor. Help us not to do things in our own strength, but draw the strength out of the love that You have for us. out of the comfort that you have for us in our situations, and that it may overflow to situations in our lives that are encountering the poor and the marginalized. And you want us to see you. Amen.